In 2024, after 17 long years, the Budokai Tenkaichi series finally returned. So when the teaser trailer dropped, showing Goku transforming into Super Saiyan Blue, the hype exploded. And by the time Sparking Zero launched, it had become one of the most anticipated Dragon Ball games in history. But the thing about hype is, it can be a double-edged sword. When expectations reach that high, it's pretty much impossible for anything to live up to them. At launch, the excitement was unreal. Fans called it the return to form for the Tenkaichi series, but once the dust settled, opinions started to split. Some felt it carried the legacy forward, others called it a disappointment. Too different, too hollow, too focused on online play. So which is it? A worthy revival? Or an overhyped comeback that really is as bad as people claim? Sparking Zero's biggest selling point, and the thing it proudly plastered across every trailer, is its absolutely massive roster. Over 180 characters in the base game alone. That's a lot. It's the biggest roster in any Dragon Ball game ever, easily outpacing even Tenkaichi 3, which used to be the gold standard for sheer character count. You've got a mix from every corner of the Dragon Ball timeline, from the early days of the original series all the way up through Super. But if you're someone who's never played a Sparking game before, it might look a bit copy-pasty. Is that a word? Copy-pasty? Because yeah, there's like 18 different Gokus, a small army of Vegetas, and a bunch of Gohans. Maybe too many.
I'm like, what do you say fuck me for?
Now, in the Dragon Ball franchise, we think of Goku across the different sagas as one continuous character, growing, learning, transforming. But in the Sparking series, each era of a fighter is its own separate slot. Saiyan Saga Goku isn't the same as Cell Saga Goku, who isn't the same as Super Saiyan Blue Goku, and so on. They each have their own unique movesets, abilities, and even slightly different playstyles. It's less about bloating the roster and more about giving you multiple loadouts for each fighter, just in the form of entirely separate characters. It's just how the Sparking series has always done it. And once you get used to it, it makes sense. Yeah, just to an extent. You're not just swapping out capsules like in the Budokai games, you're picking which version of a fighter's entire fighting style you want to use. And honestly, you can't deny how much work went into making each version feel distinct. The character modeling, the animation work, even the idle poses, they all ooze personality. Watching each fighter's unique movements, transformations, and attacks never gets old. It's one of those things where half the fun is just seeing how each version of the character is represented. Now, with a roster this big, you'd think balancing it would be a nightmare. And yeah, it's not balanced. This is the reality of it. Some characters are blatantly better than others. For offline, it's kind of fun. You can make your own challenge by picking weaker characters or just experiment with matchups. But online, it's a bit of a mess. You see the same top tier fighters over and over again, because that's just what wins. Personally, I don't mind because I mostly play offline anyway, but I get why this annoys online players so much. And honestly, part of me kind of wishes they leaned into it more. Let Super Saiyan Blue Goku actually feel leagues stronger than Saiyan Saga Goku. Let Frieza's gold form wipe the floor with early era characters. Sure, it would destroy any sense of balance, but it would be more authentic to the series and fun. Well, probably only fun for like 10 minutes and then you're like, this sucks. I know it's completely impractical, but it would have been interesting to see the power scaling reflected in the gameplay. Bad idea though for a fighting game. This is why I don't make games. Not everyone's unlocked right away though. A lot of the cast is tied to story progression or can be brought directly in the shop using Zenny. Each individual character also has their own proficiency level, which at first I thought affected stats or abilities, but no, it's just a tracker for how much you've used that character. As more of an achievement type thing, You can cash in some of these in-game milestones with Xeno or Whis for rewards, usually profile titles, but sometimes costumes, characters, or even Dragon Balls. And don't confuse character proficiency with your player level, because that's a whole other system that basically does the same thing, but in a broader sense. A player level increases as you play. That's a good sentence. Unlocking new items, ability capsules, and even characters in the shop. It caps out at 20, and if you really want to speed it up, you can even wish for experience using the Dragon Balls. Sparking Zero has a lot of these progression systems that honestly feel like they've been ripped from a mobile game or like a battle pass or something, but they don't make you pay extra for it. At least not yet. I don't want to give them any ideas. The downside to all this, to having such a massive roster, is that it almost becomes a problem in itself.
Completely unmanageable.
Not every character gets the attention they deserve, and at times it feels like the sheer size of the roster is doing most of the heavy lifting for the game. It's undeniably impressive, but it's also a clear example that bigger doesn't always mean better. Am I right, fellas? I don't know what I'm talking about. Just ignore me. And that issue only becomes more noticeable when you look at how the game actually uses, or more accurately, barely uses, its roster across the game modes. If you're enjoying this retrospective, don't forget to hit the like button as it helps out the video, allegedly. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of other Dragon Ball game retrospectives already up, covering everything from the PS2 classics to some of the more modern titles. So if you're a fan of Dragon Ball gaming history, there's plenty more videos for you. Story modes in Dragon Ball games have always been my favourite aspect. Sure, there is versus, and now with more modern titles, online play, but for me, nothing can beat a good single player story mode. And Sparking Zero kind of delivers? Kind of? I have to say, Sparking Zero is the definitive mixed bag of mixed bags when it comes to its content. It's like if someone were to put ketchup on ice cream, and you're just like,
but why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
the first odd choice is noticeable before you even enter the mode. In other Dragon Ball games, the story modes are called something like Dragon Universe or Dragon History, you know, something cool sounding like that. But in Sparking Zero, the story mode is called Episode Battle, the most underwhelming name they could come up with. It feels like a placeholder name and they forgot to change it. Why not something like Sparking Galaxy or, I don't know, just something better than this? Although I do have to say that the menus are really cool though. I'll give them that. Despite the lackluster name, Sparking Zero Story Mode is one of the most ambitious in any Dragon Ball game, and this is both one of its biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses. It has multiple character campaigns for you to pick from, and you'll be playing from that character's perspective through the various sagas. Now, this structure is nothing new to Dragon Ball games, but the decision to use this structure here is a bit questionable, as it doesn't play to Sparking Zero's biggest asset, its massive character roster. By narrowing it down to only a select few fighters, the story mode makes very little use of said roster size. Yes, you do get to face off against a lot of the characters, but you, the player, are not given the opportunity to fight as them. Now, this wouldn't be as big of a deal if it weren't for the fact that Sparking Zero as a whole has very little offerings for the single player other than the story. But I'll get more into that a little bit later. Oh, we will. Before diving into the scenarios themselves, let's talk about how the story is presented. Sparking Zero looks fantastic. The cell shading on the characters is sharp, vibrant, and easily some of the best in the series. But the presentation is held back by uneven animations during cutscenes. Expressions often feel flat or frozen, which is frustrating when you know how expressive these models can be during fights. It's clear the developers had to stretch resources to cover such a massive amount of content, which led to some odd shortcuts. Also, some of the background assets looked like just default settings from the modeling software. Like the grass just does not match the art style of the game. I mean, come on guys, Breath of the Wild solved the issue of cel-shaded grass in 2017. How do you get grass so wrong? I'm sorry, I need to calm down. It's just grass. We did perspectives. One of the strangest choices is the photo-style transitions, where story moments are presented as still images with minimal camera movement. They save time, sure, but they clash with the energy of the other cutscenes. If the devs wanted a quick way to convey snapshots, manga panels would have been a far better fit. They'd tie into the franchise's roots and add a stylistic flair instead of feeling like postcards from a holiday on Planet Namek or something. This is very strange. Then there's the narrator, who pops in and out like he's not entirely sure he wants to be there. Some scenes have voice dialogue, others just text, and the inconsistency makes the whole thing feel unfinished. The story map, on the other hand, is a neat touch, once you find it. On my first playthrough, I played through the entire Saiyan saga without even realizing there was a map, but there is. It's handy for seeing branching paths or replaying fights, though moving between nodes feels oddly sluggish. It's like really laggy. I don't think it's my PC either. I've watched playthroughs and it's also laggy on those too. There are 8 characters with their own story campaigns: Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Future Trunks, Frieza, Goku Black, and Jiren. And unsurprisingly, Goku's story mode is by far the most extensive. So let's start with his, since it's the best overall representation of how this mode works. Where Sparking Zero really shines is how it integrates its what-if paths into both story and gameplay. Right from the start, you're given a choice: stick to the original timeline or dive into what-if scenarios that rewrite the course of the events entirely. That flexibility is what makes this mode so fascinating. Take one of the early battles with Raditz. If you defeat him fast enough, Piccolo never joins in, and the story veers off course. Because Goku survives this version of the fight, he never trains with King Kai, meaning his moveset against Nappa is totally different. I love that the game tracks these consequences beyond just the cutscenes. But with branching paths comes complications. For example, Goku's decision to let Gohan train with Piccolo feels weird when you've been steering him down a path where he didn't trust Piccolo at all. The ripples of small changes can quickly snowball, which is probably why most Dragon Ball games avoid straying far from canon. Personally, I'd rather they lean into the mess. Sparking Zero proves that experimenting can be worth it. Even minor fights have clever little twists. During the Ginyu Force battles, the outcome of who flees depends on whether you deflect Jace's Crusher Ball or not. It doesn't radically alter the story or anything, but it gives you a reason to replay and experiment. The Saiyan Saga offers the boldest departures. Goku's early Super Saiyan transformation against Vegeta is so awesome, but the canon route feels rushed compared to the alternate one. Some scenes also skip over details, like Yajirobe just kind of appears out of nowhere, or the reveal about Piccolo's Namekian heritage, it just kind of never comes up. Still, the in-battle banter is a clever way to deliver lore without dragging down the pacing. What many new players and even some veterans in the series get caught off guard by is the difficulty of the story mode. To be fair, the controls and mechanics can take a bit to get used to, even if you've played the earlier titles. It may seem like an obvious thing to point out, but this game really does require you to play through the tutorial to get a real handle on the mechanics, which wasn't necessarily the case with the other games, as there was a defined easy, normal and hard setting to pick from. You could just work your way up through the difficulties and do quite well. Not so much with Sparking Zero. While the game does have an easy setting that you can activate from the map screen, it does lock you out of accessing quite a bit of the story mode, like some of the what-if scenarios and alternate endings, which was not the case in Tenkaichi 3. No matter what the difficulty you set in the story mode, you could access everything. This definitely greatly discourages playing on easy. I understand wanting to reward players for being good at the game. I mean, many Dragon Ball games do this, but I think the reward should have been something different, like unlocking a unique character outfit or something like that. I don't think locking away half the story to struggling players is the best idea. I think it should be the opposite. You should be rewarding good play, not punishing bad play, if that makes sense. The most infamous choke point for players has to be the fight against Grade 8 Vegeta, and yes, it is because Sparking Zero is less forgiving, but also because fighting against giant characters is a bit different from other fights, and the game never really warns you of this fact. Giants are best approached with a hit and run tactic, which is effective but not exactly fun. In my opinion, giant characters have never been fun to fight as or against in the Sparking series, and this game is no different. It's a shame that the devs were not able to improve on this gameplay aspect, as it has always been one of the weakest aspects of the combat. They try to make the giant characters tie in fairly with regular sized characters, but it just makes them feel like lumbering sacks of potatoes rather than the powerhouses they're supposed to be. They work much better as raid boss kind of setups seen in the Xenoverse games, or even Battle of Z. Yes, I am complimenting Battle of Z. I can do that, I can compliment bad games. The Frieza saga has fewer what-if paths, but the big one from Goku's Saiyan saga threads through all the way here. There's also an alternative ending if you take out Frieza without the Spirit Bomb, though the cutscene for it is quite abrupt. On the downside, Goku's Super Saiyan transformation is criminally underwhelming.
You, ruthless, heartless bastard! Go! Take Piccolo with you and get out of here now! Find Bulma, find the spaceship, and go!
Let's try this one more time, but a teensy bit less like a zombie, okay?
The voice acting is great, but the animation lacks the punch of even the in-game transformation, which is weird because you think it'd be the opposite. Sparking Zero's story presentation is honestly kind of strange. It's one of the most inconsistent looking Dragon Ball games I have ever played. And I have played Taiketsu, but at least that's like consistently bad. This is like consistently inconsistent. That doesn't make sense. On one hand, you've got some of the cheapest looking cutscenes imaginable, characters barely moving, shots held on still frames for way too long, and moments that feel more like slideshows than actual animations. But then, out of nowhere, the game hits you with some of the best fully animated Dragon Ball cutscenes we've seen in years. When Sparking Zero goes all in, it really goes in. The fights look fluid, the effects explode across the screen, and the scale of battles actually feels massive. Pair all that with strong voice acting, and you end up with some genuinely great recreations of iconic Dragon Ball moments. The problem is the inconsistency. For every hype cutscene that nails the anime feel, you get another one that falls flat or oddly paced. A big part of that comes down to the game's heavy use of one-ers. If you don't know what that is, a one-er is a scene shot in one continuous take with no cuts, something that's usually really impressive in movies when it's pulled off. But in Sparking Zero, it just kind of makes certain cutscenes drag. Instead of snappy pacing or dramatic edits, you end up watching a single camera slowly follow characters around while nothing much happens. It's a weird choice that sometimes makes the storytelling feel slower than it should be. And I think I know why they did it. A lot of Sparking Zero's cutscenes have this gimmick where you can view them from the perspective of a certain character, in first person. In order for that to work, the game needed those scenes to be done as one-ers, so the perspective is continuous. But was it really worth it? Honestly, not really. The first person perspective doesn't add much to the experience beyond a quick, oh, that's neat moment. And it comes at the cost of pacing and scenes that should feel exciting. To me, it feels like someone on the dev team really loved this idea and kept pushing it until it made it into the game, even if it didn't quite fit. I don't have any evidence for this, it's just a theory, but I can't imagine any other reason why they decided to leave this feature in. It just doesn't, it just doesn't work. It's not worth the effort. The Cell Saga's strongest moments once again comes from its what-if scenarios. There's a great one where Goku takes a much more active role in defeating Cell, but focusing on a single character's perspective at a time does come at a cost. We lose out on Gohan's emotional growth and the build up to his Super Saiyan 2 transformation, since all of that happens in a separate campaign. It's a structural issue that's been around in Dragon Ball games for years. Splitting the story between multiple characters always makes it feel a little fragmented. It's not unique to Sparking Zero, but it's still disappointing that even after all this time, the series hasn't found a good way to fix it. That same problem carries over into the Buu saga. The early parts, like Goku's return to Earth and the World Tournament, rush by quickly. Once Majin Vegeta enters the picture though, things pick up. From there, the saga hits the familiar beats, fusion battles, the fight against Kid Buu, and a few optional twists. You can go Super Saiyan 3 early, or win fights that normally end in defeat, which is a nice touch. But the cutscenes that follow don't always have the same polish, leaving some of those alternative outcomes feeling unfinished. Another thing really holding Sparking Zero's story back is the severe lack of stages. There are only 12 in the base game, And no, I'm not counting different times a day as separate stages. I didn't count that in Tenkaichi 3 and it doesn't count here either. Now, to be fair, the stages that are here are visually impressive. They're massive, with a good amount of vertical space and destruction detail. But the problem isn't how they look, it's how few of them there are. The story mode ends up constantly recycling the same handful of environments, which kills a lot of the immersion. Big moments from the show that should feel distinct or iconic just don't hit the same when they're taking place in the exact same rocky canyon you've already fought in 20 times. So instead of getting to actually experience those events, the game often just alludes them through the dialogue or narration, or just skips over them entirely, leaving some big gaps in the narrative. And this isn't just a story mode problem either. The lack of stages affects everything. It bleeds into versus mode, online, custom battles, pretty much any mode that involves you actually picking a location. You'll find yourself cycling through the same few arenas over and over, and even though they're nicely made, it starts to feel repetitive fast. It's especially disappointing because previous Tenkaichi games had way more variety. There was a real sense of scope. You felt like you were fighting across a fair bit of the Dragon Ball universe. Sparking Zero, despite all its technical upgrades, feels smaller in comparison. When the game first came out, I thought they were holding back on a bunch of stages for the DLC, but that hasn't been the case so far, and I'm honestly surprised that none of the DLC or updates have addressed this lack of variety issue when it comes to the stages. It seems like a really obvious thing to fix, yet they don't do it. It's just a shame there isn't more, because it directly hurts the pacing and presentation of the story. And that really sums it up. Sparking Zero's combat feels big and cinematic, but the world it takes place in doesn't. When every climactic moment keeps happening in the same few fields and wastelands, the story loses some of its magic. After years of Dragon Ball games stopping at Z, Sparking Zero finally gets to cover some of Dragon Ball Super. Not all of it, but a fair bit. And while it's great to finally see arcs like Goku Black and the Tournament of Power represented, the execution feels uneven. The Goku Black saga, for instance, rushes through what should have been some of the most suspenseful and cinematic moments in the entire story. The mystery, the tension, it all gets lost because the pacing doesn't give it time to breathe. And the Tournament of Power ends up feeling like a rapid-fire highlight reel, an endless string of fights with very little connective tissue between them. Trimming down some of these moments or focusing on fewer key battles could have gone a long way towards making the narrative flow better. So overall, the story presentation ends up being all over the place. It feels like the team had really ambitious ideas for how they wanted to present the Dragon Ball story, but maybe spread themselves too thin. If they had narrowed the focus, maybe they could have delivered something visually stunning all the way through. Instead, what we got feels like a mix of brilliance and budget constraints fighting each other at every turn. And this might be a controversial take, but I don't think Sparking Zero needed to tell the Dragon Ball Z arcs again. We've had so many Dragon Ball games cover the Saiyan, Frieza, Cell and Buu arcs at this point that they don't really add anything new by running through them one more time. I would have much rather they just focus entirely on Dragon Ball Super or films, or, make their own story. The newer arcs still don't have nearly as many dedicated story mode recreations in games, and they would have been the perfect place to push all of this ambition without being weighed down by redoing material we've already played dozens of times. I think Z is better than Super, but you know what I mean? Gives Super needs time, its own space. Like I was saying, Goku isn't the only one with a story mode. Vegeta's campaign doesn't branch off into alternative what-ifs past during the Saiyan saga, but it works as a great companion piece to Goku's story, especially during the Frieza arc. It even dives into moments we haven't really seen explored before, like his and Trunks' hyperbolic time chamber training. Oddly though, Vegeta's story cuts off before Super, which feels like a really odd choice considering how much of that era revolves around Vegeta and Goku. And yet, Vegeta is not here. Gohan's Super arc, on the other hand, is one of the real highlights of the story mode. It actually gives side characters stuff to do, something that's sorely needed in an era so centered around Goku and Vegeta, who is not here. Okay, he's here, he just doesn't get a campaign. And while the remaining campaigns, like those of Frieza, Goku Black and Jiren, aren't nearly as fleshed out, they're still fun additions. It's refreshing to experience things from the villain's perspective, especially in a game that's usually told through the eyes of the heroes. Dragon Ball games often share a notable weakness that is frequently overlooked. They typically start their stories in medium res, which, if you don't know, in medium res is just a fancy way of saying that a narrative begins in the middle of the plot, rather than at the beginning. In such narratives, the backstory is usually interwoven into the unfolding events, or the timeline occasionally flashes back to early events to provide necessary context. However, this approach is really utilised effectively in Dragon Ball games. Because of this, significant context and character relevance are often omitted, leaving gaps in the storytelling. There's one area where Sparking Zero actually does a better job than most of its predecessors. It still jumps around a bit, this is Dragon Ball after all, but there's clearly more effort to put into grounding the story. The game sprinkles in bits of content through dialogue, cutscenes, and even character bios that fill in the missing details. It's not perfect, and yeah, the text-based summaries feel disconnected from the gameplay, but it's still a step in the right direction. At least the game tries to bring players up to speed instead of assuming everyone has the entire series memorized. And when you put it all together, Sparking Zero's story mode is pretty good. The what-if scenarios and alternate endings keep things feeling fresh, and it's easily the most fleshed out story mode in the Sparking series. Not every arc hits and the pacing can be uneven, but compared to the older games, it's a clear evolution. The only real competition I'd say is Sparking Nero, aka Tenkaichi 2, which still stands out for its structure and scale. But in terms of presentation and variety, Sparking Zero is probably the best. It's a solid story mode. Not groundbreaking, just really solid. So we've got this massive story mode and an even bigger roster, but how well does it all actually play? Yes, I am finally going to be talking about the gameplay in a video about a game. Sparking Zero's gameplay is a mix of the old and the new. It's a lot faster paced than any of the other entries in the series, which for some can be seen as a positive. However, for me, I do see it as a bit of a negative, especially when you're starting out. Mostly because the speed makes it very unruly when first learning the controls and basic mechanics. Thankfully, the game does have a pretty decent tutorial that you can play through, and you will want to play through this as, like all the other Sparking games, Sparking Zero isn't exactly intuitive. And even after going through the entire training mode, there is still a bunch of stuff that the game doesn't really explain that well and can only really be learnt through practice. But the game's tutorial does teach you enough to get you prepared for the story mode that is actually quite a bit harder than previous titles. Well, at least I think that it is. But I'm not exactly a pro player, so this is going to be more of a casual player rundown of the mechanics. But you don't need to be a pro to enjoy and appreciate Sparking Zero's mechanics. The first thing to get used to is the movement. Unlike 2D fighters, Sparking Zero is fully 3D, so you can fly up and down and all around. Dashing is your bread and butter tool for escaping danger or repositioning, though it drains ki quickly if you rely on it too much. If you want to close space aggressively, you can speed up towards your opponent using Dragon Rush. And don't worry, it's nothing like the Dragon Rush in Budokai 3. Thank God for that. It's great for forcing exchanges, but predictable if you spam it. Like most things in Sparking Zero, it's about timing. For your basic attacks, you have the Rush attack, giving you quick melee strings, or when charged, heavy smashes that can send opponents flying. These smashes aren't just for damage, they set up chases, teleports, and extended combos. Heavy attacks typically fly ki blasts, but depending on the character and spacing, they can become melee strikes or combo extenders. The key is understanding spacing. Attacks reach further than you'd think, so positioning matters just as much as speed. Blocking works as you'd expect, but with a little bit of extra layers. You can shift your guard to high or low, and if you block a charged strike correctly, you can actually turn it into a counter opportunity. On top of that, Sparking Zero has a whole bunch of defensive tools. Revenge counters break out of combos at the cost of skill points. High speed evasions let you dodge big attacks if your timing is perfect, which mine never is. Z counters flip or teleport back on the opponent, sometimes leading to those wild teleport wars where both players burn through ki trying to out teleport each other. It does feel a bit chaotic at times, but it does become quite fun once you get used to the various systems. Combos here aren't rigid like in traditional fighters. Instead, they're designed to feel more free-flowing. The system won't let you loop the same string forever, so you need to mix things up with launches, chases, or energy blasts. Positioning is huge. Attacking from behind is faster, stronger, and much harder to defend against. Many characters even have strings that spin the opponent around mid-combo, setting up guaranteed attacks up the bum.
Fingered the bum.
Creative combos is the name of the game, and it is one of the main aspects that gives the Sparking series combat its unique feel. Your iconic moves, Kamehamehas, Garlic Guns, Masenkos, are fueled by ki, while unique character skills draw from a regenerating skill meter. Ki has to be recharged manually, meaning you'll often need to step back a bit and recharge. Blasts work best as a combo finisher and aren't as effective as long-range attacks from across the field, since movement options make dodging them so easy, but it is tempting to try. Many blasts can be boosted for extra power, but overcharging restrain you into fatigue, leaving you helpless. Also, Sparking Zero now actually has your character blast moves and skills displayed in the corner, so now you don't even have to remember which of the 50 different Kokus you are playing as, because it will tell you. One of the more unique mechanics is perception. If you expect a Dragon Rush is incoming, holding perception will let you counter it. With skill points, Super Perception expands this to heavy strikes and even massive energy blasts. I kinda suck at this mechanic because I always get baited into using it at the wrong time, which I guess makes it kinda interesting because you always have to kinda have it at the back of your mind to be like, should I use it now? Should I not? Shouldn't have done it. Transformations work off your skill meter. When the conditions are met and the icon appears, you can transform to your next form. What is that sentence? You can transform into your next form. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Fusion works the same way, but requires the exact character versions to be on your team. So End of Z Goku won't fuse with GT Vegeta, because he's too old. If you're running a team setup, you can always tag in teammates mid-match, keeping momentum going and extending your survivability. Sparking Zero doesn't leave you helpless when knocked around. You can recover in the air after being launched, roll in a direction when grounded, or even turn a recovery into a counter rush by rising upwards the moment you hit the ground. The game tries to give you enough options so there's rarely downtime where you're just stuck getting wailed on. Now let's talk about impact actions. These are the cinematic clashes that will sometimes trigger during a match. There are 4 types. Speed impact is when both fighters Dragon Rush at each other, where you need to time a button press. Power impact happens during simultaneous grabs. You carefully fill a meter, and boosting speeds it up, but costs ki, so you don't want to be too aggressive with it. Crash impacts trigger up close. It's truly a test of speed. Whoever hits the inputs fastest wins. And then there are blast impacts. These are beam struggles. Mash hard, push the meter, and maybe burn some boosts, but overdo it and you'll drain your ki pretty quickly. As you can see, all of these impacts are mainly about balancing how much you want to commit to them. They're not complicated, but they add a bit of cinematic flair and momentum swings that the game honestly doesn't explain that well. Finally, let's go over the game's namesake, Sparking Mode. Sparking. In the English releases of the Sparking games, this name was changed to
Max Power Mode.
You know, like the setting on your hairdryer. However, in the Japanese versions, this mode was always called Sparking. Once your ki gauge is full and you have at least one skill count, you can continue charging your ki to fill your Sparking gauge. Once your Sparking gauge is completely full, you can use the skill count to enter Sparking mode. Going into this mode, you are able to do the actions that normally cost ki for free, and being immune to ki blast stun, and also allows you to use some of the most flashy and powerful moves in the game. Ultimate Blasts. These attacks look epic, and most characters have their own unique one.
Yeah! Everything I've got! All into this one attack! I will break through!
They look freaking awesome. Sparking mode is very overpowered, at least against the AI, since it's pretty easy to activate and there isn't really any punishment for abusing it. I think if they just added back in something like ki sickness from Tenkaichi 3, this could help balance this a bit. I did not explain what key sickness is. Basically, it was if you used powerful skills too much, then your key would take longer to charge. That's it. Simple, but it was annoying, which made it good. At the end, Sparking Zero combat is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, it's undeniably flashy and there's quite a bit of depth, the kind of system that feels incredible when everything clicks. But on the other hand, it often feels like it's trying a little bit too hard to be faster and more explosive than it needs to be. The result is a combat system that looks amazing in motion, but can be frustrating to actually play, especially early on. The game's speed, while impressive, sometimes works against it. It's so fast paced that learning the basics can feel a bit overwhelming, especially if you skip over the training mode. Even with the tutorial, there are mechanics the game doesn't really explain, leaving you to piece things together through trial and error. It's that classic Tenkaichi chaos, except now it's dialed up to 11, and not always in a good way. When you finally start to get comfortable, the combat can feel fantastic, but getting to that point can be rough, especially for new or casual players. It just moves too fast for my tiny brain. My brain's like, what's going on? Where am I? That's not to say that there isn't brilliance underneath the chaos, because there absolutely is. When you start chaining together combos, reading your opponent's moves, and perfectly timing counters and teleports, you can feel that signature Budokai Tenkaichi rhythm again. But Sparking Zero often buries that flow under so many layers of effects, speed boosts, and overlapping systems that it's sometimes hard to fully appreciate it. The combat nails the spectacle, no question about it. It looks and sounds incredible, and it absolutely captures the spirit of Dragon Ball. But from a gameplay standpoint, it sometimes feels like it sacrifices clarity for flash. And I can't help but feel that the older Sparking games struck a better balance between accessibility and intensity. But I am very biased in that regard because I love Tenkaichi 3, so I just need to make sure to keep that in mind, that I am very, very biased. At its core, it feels like a Budokai Tenkaichi game, and overall it's a solid modern take on the classic system, but maybe trying to impress us a bit too much. Unfortunately, after finishing Sparking Zero's story mode, there isn't really that much left to do. The single player side feels surprisingly bare. Custom Battle is probably the most unique mode in Sparking Zero. Nothing else in the series really comes close to it. Like the name implies, it lets you build your own battles, but it goes way beyond just picking a few characters and stages. It's basically fanfiction in game form. That's the best way I can describe it. You can edit the rules of a match, add dialogue and cutscenes, set win conditions, give characters specific items, and even create custom title cards. Once you've built your scenario, you can play it yourself or upload it to online for others to try. And of course, download other players' creations too. I really like the idea of this mode. It's incredibly creative, but in practice, it's not something I've spent much time with. I kind of feel like I already brought the game. I don't want to make it too. You know what I mean? There are a few pre-made examples included, and they're alright, I guess, but the real appeal is diving in deep and crafting your own. If I were still a kid, I know I'd lose hours in this mode, making what-if scenarios, weird team-ups, or my own versions of iconic fights. But as an adult, I just don't have the time or energy for that kind of thing. I kind of just want to play the game and not develop it. I'm sorry, I can't be bothered. The rest of its offline offerings feel a bit lackluster, to be perfectly honest. You've got the standard versus mode, which does exactly what you'd expect. And then there's the tournament mode, which on paper sounds like a great throwback to the older Budokai Tenkaichi games. You can set up both online and offline tournaments and choose from 6 different types. World Tournament is the classic rules, win by knockout or by knocking your opponent out of the ring. Cell Games is a tougher gauntlet where you only recover 20% of your health between fights. Tournament of Power is team-based battles with no flying and strict ring-out conditions. Once a fight is gone, they're gone. Otherworld Tournament is standard single battles on a stage with no out-of-bounds rules. Tournament of Destroyers is not in this game. Okay. Tournament of Destroyers is team battles with no character swapping mid-fight, but you do get full health recovery between matches. Yamcha Games is my personal favourite tournament, where both player and CPU characters are chosen at random. I just find the RNG element quite fun. There's nothing special, it's just fun. It's a solid lineup, and I do appreciate the variety, but after a few rounds, it becomes clear that something's missing. These tournaments don't really feel rewarding to play. You mostly earn Zenny, which you already get from mostly everything else in the game anyway. There are a few unlockable characters tied to it, but even those can just be brought to you from the shop, which kind of takes the excitement out of it. This is a reoccurring issue throughout Sparking Zero. So many of its systems, the shop, the unlocks, even the proficiency levels, are technically functional, but they don't really feel meaningful. There's no real sense of accomplishment tied to them. It just feels like you're just ticking off a checklist. And this lack of incentive feeds into the game's bigger problem. There's just not enough offline content to keep you hooked after the story mode. Modes like tournament or custom battle should be the glue that keeps the game alive beyond the main campaign, but they don't carry the same spark. It's ironic, really. Sparking Zero has one of the biggest rosters and flashiest systems in the series, yet so few reasons to really use them once you're done with the story, unless you're really into the online. One of the things I always loved about the older Sparking games was how many different outfits each character could have. There are some seriously cool references from some of these outfits, little nods to specific episodes, movies, or even obscure moments. Sure, some characters got way more love than others, but overall there was a nice spread. Every character felt like they had at least something, even if it was just a palette swap. Sparking Zero does keep the alternate outfits, but honestly it feels kind of half-assed this time around. There are still multiple looks for some characters, but the variety just isn't as good as I was expecting. A few fighters barely get anything, and others are missing really obvious choices. Like seriously, where are Goku and Vegeta's winter coats from the Super Broly movie? Those designs are so cool. They look amazing. They fit perfectly with the current era of Dragon Ball, and they are basically made to be included in this game. But no, instead we get Goku with a different kanji on his gi. Wow, truly groundbreaking stuff. I'm being a bitch, I know, but they never include the winter outfits, like Goku, like Kid Goku's winter outfit. They never have that. They always don't want it either. Gay. The outfits are purely cosmetic and don't change anything. Well, apart from a couple, like one of Android 18's outfits changes out her blast attacks. But for the most part, it's purely cosmetic, which is fine, but it makes me wish they leaned into it more. Imagine being able to mix and match outfits, like putting Goku's Z era gi on his super version, or having Vegeta wear his Saiyan armor during a super arc fight. Nothing that would break the game or anything, just little customization touches that would make unlocking the outfits more worthwhile. It could even have some fun implications for online play, like queuing up for a match and seeing Goku on the other side and not immediately knowing which version you're fighting. It probably wouldn't fool anyone for long, but it would at least make things a little more unpredictable. But the biggest disappointment by far has to be the accessories. Or the lack of accessories, like what the fuck? When I first saw that every character had an accessory slot in the customization menu, I was quite excited. But then you get more into the game and realize there are like 4 accessories total, and barely any characters can even use them. It's such a tease. I get that modeling accessories for every character would take a lot of work, making sure they fit properly, don't clip through hair or armor, that kind of thing. But if that was going to be the case, maybe don't put the slot there for every character. It just ends up feeling like a reminder of what could have been. Like the devs started building a really cool customization system, then ran out of time or budget halfway through or something like that. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. I was getting too excited over nothing. Wouldn't be the first time. And look, I know none of this stuff technically affects the gameplay, but it matters to me, okay? I'm a Fashion Souls kind of player. I love the idea of customizing characters, making them look cool or even a little bit stupid if I'm in the mood. It's part of the fun. And while Sparking Zero's characters look great, seriously, the models and shaders are top tier. It's hard not to feel a bit disappointed by how limited the customization options ended up being. There's so much potential here for giving players reasons to keep grinding outside of just rankings. Hopefully, if we ever get a sequel, this is one of the areas they revisit, because it could be something really awesome with just a bit more attention. But cosmetics isn't the only character customization in the game, as there are also items that you can equip to your character. The game refers to them as ability items, even though they are clearly capsules. I don't know why they aren't called capsules. Maybe to separate the system from the capsule system in the Budokai series? Or maybe it's because capsules are barely even a part of Dragon Ball anymore. They were such a cool aspect of the early Dragon Ball timeline, where they'd bust out a car or even a house while traveling. But I guess with the advent of flying into the series, the logistics of traveling around the world got way more simplified. Okay, I've gone way off topic. I'm just ranting about capsules. Anyway, but like a lot of things in Sparking Zero, it ends up feeling kind of underutilized. For starters, you can't use these items in the story mode because every character's loadout is preset. You can't change a thing. So there goes the most obvious mode where these items could have actually added some variety or replayability. And then there's online play. You can't use them in ranked matches either, which makes sense for balance reasons, but it also removes a huge chunk of the game where the system could have had some life. You can technically use them in unranked lobbies, but in my experience, barely anyone has them turned on. Most players just go with the default setups, whatever that is. I think it's nothing. How do you balance something? Make everyone the same. Okay, good idea. That basically leaves the ability items for custom battles, CPU fights, and casual matches with friends, which sounds like a decent amount when you list it out like that, but in practice there aren't that many situations where you'll find yourself actually wanting to mess around with these systems unless you're really deep into building AI battles or experimenting for fun. And don't get me wrong, that stuff can be enjoyable, especially with the new strategy items that you tweak CPU behavior, but it's definitely a niche appeal. What's frustrating is that the system itself isn't bad, it's just undercooked.
Fucking raw.
The variety of effects is decent and you can feel the difference when you stack the right combination of items, but the lack of meaningful modes to use them in makes the whole thing feel kind of pointless. Earning them doesn't feel rewarding when you know you'll barely have the opportunity to use them. Sparking Zero could have easily used these items to give players more ownership over their character, to make every match, even offline ones, feel more personalised, instead of just another system that exists in the background, technically functional, but barely relevant. And that's kind of the story with Sparking Zero's customization in general. The framework is all there, the ideas are solid, but the execution stops just short of being meaningful. It feels like the developers had the right intentions, but either ran out of time or are too focused on balancing the competitive side of things to let the customization shine. A lot of the outfits and items can be brought from the shop with Zenny. You earn Zenny by doing pretty much anything in the game. The game really wants you to have Zenny, since there is quite a bit to buy. You're even able to just straight up buy some things such as characters rather than unlocking them through the story mode or whatever. It's basically an alternative unlock. If you do buy a character before unlocking them via other means, the game will refund you the Zenny that you spent on them, which is pretty nice. In a way, I do like that you're given an option of how to unlock stuff, but in other ways it feels kinda unrewarding that there's no real challenge to unlocking characters, since you can just buy most of them. This is another reason why the accessories would have added a bit to the game, because they could have locked them away behind hard challenges as rewards, if the devs were afraid of players not having access to every character. The shop also has a bunch of voice emotes, music, and some player cards to buy too, so there is a ton of stuff to unlock, just some are more enticing than others. While Sparking Zero gives you tons of characters to choose from, the game doesn't actually use them in meaningful ways. The story mode sticks to the usual cast, Goku, Vegeta, you know who, while everyone else just sits there in the background. And online is not much better. Out of the huge roster, maybe a dozen characters actually see play. The rest might as well not exist. This is where the lack of extra modes really hurts. In Tenkaichi 3, Mission 100 pushed you to try out characters you'd never normally touch, and that was a big part of the reason why the roster felt so relevant. Here, without anything like that, the roster just becomes a list of names to scroll past in the versus mode. Sure, you can make custom battles or hop into ranked, but that gets old fast. Ranked play is sweaty, casuals like me get destroyed instantly, and there's nothing in between to bridge that gap. And that's what makes Sparking Zero's structure feel so off. It's a game that keeps telling you it's about scale, about all these characters and possibilities, yet most of this potential goes unused. The story mode shows you what the game could be, but once that's done, the rest feels oddly hollow. It was a series that once prided itself on letting you experiment with fighters. That's what the series used to get so right. And right now, Sparking Zero has kind of forgotten that. That's why I think player drop-off was so steep. Once the campaign ended, most players just drifted away. People like to say that the online scene is the most important part of Sparking Zero, but honestly, that feels more like the loud minority talking. For most fans, the real appeal of the Tenkaichi series has always been its offline content, the stuff you can keep coming back to years later. That's what made those older games feel timeless. Online ladders will always fade, but a great single player experience is something that is there forever. And while it's easy to pick apart what Sparking Zero could have done better, I think a lot of that comes from how much people care about the series. Beneath all the complaints and the nitpicks, there's still a real appreciation for what this game managed to do. The story mode is ambitious and fun, not flawless, but one of the strongest in any Dragon Ball game. The roster is massive and packed with personality, and even with its rough edges, there's an undeniable love for the source material that runs through everything. Sparking Zero was never meant to be the perfect game. It was meant to revive the series, a modern reimagining, and in that sense, it absolutely delivers. It may not recreate the same feelings you had playing the Tenkaichi games for the first time, but it captures that same spirit. And years from now, I think people will look back on Sparking Zero not for what it lacked, but for what it brought back.